If you ever see soil that looks freshly turned in a clean patio, you will probably tell yourself what I told myself. It is just a cat. I said it out loud and kept working, because ordinary explanations feel safer than silence. I was just a guy with a spare week, watching my tia Veronica's house while she traveled to another state to help a sick relative. I did not want a lesson. I only wanted to finish my chores and go home. I did not know a name can be used like a nail, and I was about to touch mine. Tia Veronica lived in a quiet colonia, where every home had a back patio, and where empty lots still sat between properties like missing teeth. Her backyard backed up to one of those lots, dry soil and weeds, pressed against an old wall with gaps from years of heat. The patio was simple, a narrow strip of concrete along the back of the house, a few pots of plants, a storage corner, and a metal door that opened from the kitchen. The first morning was routine. I swept, watered the plants, checked the windows, and cleaned until the place felt cared for. By late morning, I went to the patio with gloves and a broom to pull weeds that had started to creep onto the concrete. The sun was heavy. The concrete threw heat into my face. Dust tasted bitter when I breathed too deep, and I could smell hot cement and crushed leaves. Somewhere nearby, a radio played low enough to be background noise. Everything felt normal enough that my mind stayed lazy. I worked along the corridor toward the far corner, where nobody ever stood unless they had to. In that corner, the weeds leaned over the concrete, and the soil at the edge looked loose in a small circle, darker than the rest, as if it had been stirred recently. I shrugged. Cats ran through the lots all the time. I crouched and pushed the soil back with my fingers. My glove brushed something that did not feel like earth. It was fabric, thick and rough, wrapped tight. I scraped more dirt away and found a small bundle tied with cord about the size of my palm. It was barely buried, like it had been placed and covered in a hurry. I remember thinking it might be coins or junk. Curiosity made me stupid. I should have walked inside and left it alone. Instead, I lifted it out of the soil and carried it onto the concrete. The moment it cleared the dirt, my forearms prickled as if the shade in that corner had turned cold. I used the small pocket knife on my keys. The cord was stiff and gritty, and it resisted the blade. When it finally snapped, the knot loosened with a tiny sound that felt too loud. A dry odor rose out of the cloth, sharp and wrong, like old bone and damp earth mixed with something faintly burned. My stomach tightened before my eyes finished taking in what I was seeing. Inside was a small skull, not human, small enough to fit in my hand, cracked across the top as if it had been forced. Beside it were loose teeth. Human teeth. I knew because of their shape and the roots that still clung to them. There was a long bone broken clean in half, and a clump of hair matted with dark soil. Nothing looked tossed in at random. It looked placed. I stood there with the bag open, listening to my own breathing. A fly landed on the cloth, walked a slow circle, and left. That tiny ordinary detail made the scene feel worse. I told myself it had to be a prank. I told myself people hid ugly things sometimes. Those explanations lasted until I saw the paper. It was rolled tight and tucked inside the cracked skull, like a message hidden in a mouth that could not speak. When I tilted the bag, it slid out and fell onto the concrete near my shoe. I stared at it for a second, without touching it, then picked it up with 2 fingers. The paper was soft from moisture. I unrolled it slowly. My full name was written there, in careful letters, Ivan Salgado Herrera, not a nickname, not Ivan. The whole thing, written like the person who wrote it, did not want any mistake. My throat went dry. I looked back at the yard, at the wall, at the weeds, at the harmless corner I had been cleaning. In that moment I understood something I had never needed to understand before. A name is not always just a label. Sometimes it is a hook. I could not decide what to do. If I threw the bag away, would that erase anything? If I buried it again, was I completing whatever had been started? My mind kept reaching for logic and coming up empty. I folded the paper, put it back into the cloth, and tied the bag as best as I could with the cut cord. Then, I set it in the corner of the corridor, out of the sun, as if distance could make it harmless. I washed my hands until my knuckles hurt, and the back of my tongue still tasted like soil. All afternoon, my eyes kept drifting to the kitchen door and the lock. I kept telling myself it was just objects, just paper and bone, and that fear was only my imagination. But when I looked at my 499 card on the table, and then remembered my name sitting in that bag of teeth and hair, The letters felt heavier than they had ever felt before. I folded the paper, and for the first time my name looked like a curse. That night I locked the doors out of habit, and then checked them again, because my hands would not stop. I left the bundle where I could see it from the kitchen, and I told myself I would deal with it in daylight, when everything looked less ridiculous. I went to bed with my phone on the mattress and my ears tuned to every little sound the house made as it cooled. Sleep came in broken pieces. Around midnight I rolled onto my left side and felt a sharp pinch under my ribs. It was small but deep, like a bruise that had not surfaced yet. I blamed the work from the patio and forced myself to relax. When I finally drifted off again, the pain followed me into that shallow, uneasy sleep where you are never fully gone. Morning light did not help. The pinch had turned into a heavy ache, and when I walked to the bathroom and pulled off my shirt, I saw why. A dark mark covered my left side, almost the size of my palm, with a firm edge like a stamp. The center was purple and warm. When I pressed it lightly, pain shot through me clean and fast. I stood there staring at it, trying to remember hitting something, trying to blame it on a careless movement. I kept repeating the obvious. Bruises happen. Bodies do strange things. Coincidence is common. I walked into the kitchen still half convinced it was nothing, and froze. The back door to the patio was open, not wide open, but open enough to let a blade of sunlight cut across the floor. I stood still, listening. The colonia was awake. A motor started. Someone laughed. No footsteps in my yard, no voices close to the wall, just normal life moving past my fear. I went to the door and checked the latch. It was not broken. The metal was not bent. The lock worked smoothly. The only way it could be open like that was if I had left it unlatched, or if someone inside the house had opened it during the night. I took my phone and snapped 2 photos. One of the open door, one of the bruise, with the timestamp glowing in the corner of the screen, like evidence meant for a court that did not exist. I wanted the first explanation so badly that I almost accepted it on the spot. Then I looked down. A thin trail of gray ash dusted the corridor floor, scattered but deliberate, running from the open door toward the corner, where I had placed the bundle. It was too fine to be simple dirt. It had that dead texture of something burned down to nothing. I crouched and touched it. It smeared on my fingertip and left a faint charcoal smell. I had not burned anything. There were no candles in the kitchen, no reason for ash to be there at all. My eyes followed the trail to the corner. The bundle was still sitting where I had left it, but the soil at the edge of the corridor looked darker, fresher, as if it had been disturbed again while I slept. I stood up too fast and the room tilted. Nausea climbed into my throat. I gripped the counter until the dizziness passed, then forced myself to move like a normal person. That morning I swept the corridor. I told myself I would clean away whatever I could see and then everything would feel stupid again. The broom gathered the ash into a small heap. I dumped it into the trash and washed my hands. When I turned back, a few specks still clung to the concrete in the same pattern, as if the floor itself had decided to keep the mark. I swept again harder until the smell faded. My bruise did not. It burned as if it was being heated from inside. The rest of the day was a slow drift into discomfort. I could not eat without feeling my stomach twist. Every time I bent at the waist, pain pulled across my ribs and crept toward my back. I checked the lock twice before noon and twice again before sunset, each time hoping to catch myself in a mistake. Each time it felt solid, that made my skin crawl. That night, I shoved a kitchen chair under the door handle as a cheap alarm. I left a light on in the hallway. I lay in bed listening to the refrigerator cycle and the distant noise of cars, trying to convince my body to rest. Sometime after midnight, I woke to a soft metallic click, like a latch moving. My eyes snapped open. I did not move. I listened so hard my ears rang. The house went quiet again, the kind of quiet that feels staged. I told myself it was the chair settling. I told myself it was pipes. I told myself anything that would keep me from walking into the kitchen. When the sun rose, the chair had been moved neatly to the side. The door was open again. This time, the ash line was clearer, less scattered, running from the door straight toward the corner, like a finger pointing at the spot where my name had been buried. I stared at it for a long time without breathing right. Then I lifted my shirt. The bruise had spread. It covered most of my left side now, darker at the edges, swollen and hot. The pain did not stay in one place. It moved, wrapping around my ribs toward my spine. like something trying to circle me from the inside. My chest felt tight, not from panic, but from pressure, as if my lungs were only filling halfway. Sweat broke out along my back, even though the morning air was cool. I stepped into the patio to get fresh air and saw something new at the disturbed soil. Gray feathers arranged in a circle. Some were long, some short, all dusted with black powder. The circle was too deliberate to be accident. No wind made it, no animal made it and left it so perfect. It sat there like a quiet sentence, written on the ground. I leaned a hand on the wall and waited for the dizziness to pass. The lot behind the wall was still, weeds barely moving. The sight of those feathers made my mouth taste metallic, like fear had its own flavor. A voice called from the neighboring yard, calm and firm. It was Dona Elba, an older woman who lived next door on the right. I had seen her once since arriving, watching through her side gate. Never nosy, just aware. She looked at me now and her face tightened. "You look pale," she said. "You are walking wrong." I tried to answer with a joke, but my voice sounded thin. I lifted my shirt enough for her to see the bruise. The moment she saw it, her expression shifted from concern to recognition, and that recognition scared me more than the bruise itself. She walked closer, but did not step into the feather circle. Her eyes moved from my skin to the soil, to the corner. "That did not happen by itself," she said. "Someone buried something for you." I told her about the bundle. I did not leave anything out. The skull, the teeth, the hair, and the paper with my full name. I expected her to laugh or tell me to stop. She did neither. "In towns like this," she said, "people still use dirt to hide things meant for the spirit, and they wait for those things to reach the body." I asked who would do that. My voice cracked on the question. Dona Elba shook her head once. "It is never a stranger," she said. "It is someone who knows you will be here. Someone who wants your strength to leak out until you cannot stand." She pointed at the bruise without touching it. "When your true name is in the ground," she said, "your body starts to answer. That is why it grows fast. That is why it hurts deep." She told me she knew a woman outside the colonia who could break heavy work like this. Not a healer for show, not a quick prayer. Someone who had stopped things worse than bruises. She grabbed her bag, took my arm, and started walking, as if waiting was the same as giving up. I wanted to argue. I wanted to say I would go to a clinic, take medicine, ignore it until it faded, but the truth was simple. My bruise was growing in hours, and my door had opened itself twice while I slept. As we stepped into the street, Donna Elba said one thing that settled in my stomach like a stone. "When they write your full name, the damage does not lose your address." We walked toward the back street, and then out past the houses where the pavement thinned and the lots widened. The sun was dropping, and the light turned yellow, stretching shadows across the road. Each step made the bruise flare. The pain was not steady. It traveled, tightening around my ribs, then sliding toward my back, as if it was searching for a place to settle. Dona Elba stayed close enough that I could lean on her if my legs gave out. She did not dramatize anything. She moved with the certainty of someone who did not want me to turn back. We passed a line of mesquite trees and a small rise. Beyond it sat an old house with thick walls and a low roof. From the road it looked closed, almost blind. No obvious windows, just a dark wooden door. Stones were set along the edge of the yard in a rough line, like a boundary. Dona Elba knocked. The door opened quickly, like the person inside had been listening. A woman stood in the doorway with her hair pulled back tight, and her face unreadable. Her eyes went straight to my chest, then to my hands shaking at my sides. She did not ask who I was. She gestured us in. Inside, the air hit me first. It smelled of resin, smoke, and damp earth. The light was low and controlled, coming from black candles set in shallow dishes along shelves and small tables. Nothing in the room looked decorative. It looked used. Along the walls were wooden figures with long faces and hollow eyes, carved rough and turned at slightly different angles. Jars filled with dark soil sat beside jars that held small bones. Bundles were tied with thin strips of leather or cloth. In the center stood a thick wooden table scarred by deep cuts in random directions. The woman was Dona Jacinta. She pointed to a chair facing the table. "Sit." I sat. The chair was solid, but my legs still trembled. Dona Elba stood behind me without speaking. Dona Jacinta made a short gesture at my shirt. "Raise it." I lifted the fabric slowly. because any twist of my torso made the bruise burn under the candlelight. The mark looked darker than it had in the morning, almost black along the edge, swollen and hot. Donna seemed to leaned in and watched it in silence for several seconds. She did not touch it. She moved her hand near the skin as if feeling the heat without making contact. Heavy, she said. Brujeria passata. I told her what I had found in the patio corner. I described the small skull, the human teeth, the broken bone, the clump of hair, and the paper with my name. As I spoke, my mouth dried out. Donna Jacinta listened without interrupting. When I finished, she nodded once. The skull and the teeth are for speed, she said. Not weeks, days. The broken bone is fatigue. They want your body to feel like it is collapsing. The hair and the dirt are to make your skin answer, to make the mark spread. The paper is the lock. Your name is the nail that holds it in place. Donna Jacinta looked at me as if she could see past my face. People think the hard part is the name, she said. Names are easy. A bill, a document, a message you left on a counter. The hard part is getting you alone. The hard part is making you touch it first. I opened my mouth, and she lifted a finger, stopping me. She reached under the table and pulled out a shallow metal bowl. Inside were coarse salt crystals and charcoal ground into a dark powder. She mixed them with her fingers until the black and white became one rough gray. She came around the table and placed a hand on my shoulder. Her grip was strong. Do not move, she said. Pain is the door. Hold it shut. She scooped the mixture and pressed it onto the bruise. The salt scraped like sandpaper. The charcoal smeared and stained my skin. The pressure was hard enough that my ribs felt compressed. I clenched my jaw so tightly my teeth ached. The burn rose quick and raw, and my body tried to jerk away on instinct. Donna Jacinta pushed me back into the chair without raising her voice. A curse works best when you help it, she said. You are not helping it today. She kept rubbing, working the mixture into the edges of the bruise, as if she was trying to reach something beneath the surface. My vision blurred. I could hear my own breathing and the faint crackle of candles. Then she reached for a bottle. Before I could speak, she poured clear alcohol straight onto the salt and charcoal. The pain hit like fire. It was so immediate that my mind went blank for a second. I shouted and grabbed the chair arms hard enough to bruise my palms. My legs kicked once against the floor. Tears forced their way out of my eyes, not from emotion but from shock. My stomach rolled and I swallowed hard to keep from vomiting. Donna Jacinta did not stop. She watched my face with the focus of someone waiting for a reaction that meant something. Breathe, she said. If you faint, it stays inside. The alcohol ran down my side after the first burn, cold in thin streams, carrying black streaks with it. My skin throbbed. My lungs finally pulled in a deeper breath, and I realized the pressure in my chest had eased. Donna Jacinta held out her hand. Donna Elba reached into her bag and pulled out a plastic wrap with the rolled paper. Seeing my name again made my stomach twist. Donna Jacinta took the paper and walked to a shallow bowl filled with black water, water made dark with ash and soil. She pushed the paper down into it and held it there until it soaked and sank. Your name goes down so your body can come back up, she said. She set the bowl aside and picked up an old knife with a stained blade. She moved the knife around my body in the air, tracing near my shoulders, my chest, my back, my ribs, never cutting skin, only cutting space. Her lips moved fast, murmuring words I could not separate. The room felt as if it tightened around those sounds. One candle hissed, and the flame leaned sideways without any breeze. I heard a faint scrape from somewhere behind the wooden figures, like a dry fingernail on wood, and my shoulders lifted on instinct. Donna Elba touched the back of my chair to steady me, but her hand was cold. For a second, I was sure the bruise itself was listening, responding to the words like a wound with ears. I wanted to stand up and run, yet my legs stayed planted, like the house itself had taken my knees and was holding them in place. As she drew the knife around me, the burning in my side changed. It stopped being a flat pain and became a focused pressure, like something trapped under my skin was being pressed toward an exit. The bruise pulsed, then throbbed, and then the sensation shifted downward, away from my ribs as if it was retreating. I gasped. The breath came easier. Donna Jacinta lowered the knife and set it on the table. She wiped her hands on a cloth already stained dark, and leaned close enough that her hair brushed my ear. "This was done by someone close," she said. "Someone who has been inside that house. Someone who knows the yard." The words landed hard. My mind tried to run through faces, through visits, through small moments that suddenly looked sharp. She warned me not to chase the wrong truth, like trying to catch smoke with bare hands. Then she stepped back and looked at the bruise again. In the candlelight, the edge had softened. The center looked less black, more purple, like a bruise that belonged to an ordinary world. "It is broken," Dona Jacinta said. "Not erased. Broken. You will feel tired today. You will sleep. If the pressure in your chest returns, you come back. If you find fresh dirt again, you do not touch it. You close the door, and you walk away." I stood up slowly. My legs wobbled, but I did not collapse. Dona Elba held my elbow to steady me. As we walked out, Dona Jacinta said, "One last thing," quiet and sharp. "Whoever buried it had already been inside your tia's house." We walked back in silence. The bruise still hurt, but it no longer felt alive. When we reached my tia Veronica's house, Dona Elba stopped at her gate and told me to keep the door shut and to stop touching anything that looked placed. I slept that night like someone who had been held underwater and finally released. When I woke, the bruise had faded from near black to a dull purple. The hard edge was soft. I could breathe deep without that pressure. Pinching my chest, I stood in the kitchen, staring at the back door, trying to decide what a normal person would do after learning that a bundle of teeth could find its way into a yard and begin to rewrite your body. I did not feel brave. I felt careful. I took a shovel and went to the corner of the patio. I did not open the bundle again. I did not examine the feathers. I did not try to understand the logic behind the objects. I did the only thing I could do without inviting more attention. I cleaned. I scooped the disturbed soil and spread it out, flattening it until the color matched the surrounding dirt. I pulled weeds and packed them into a trash bag. I gathered the last feathers with gloved hands and threw them away. I washed the corridor floor until the faint ash stains disappeared. Then I set a line of stones along the edge so the corner looked unwelcoming, like a place that would refuse a secret. Days passed with no new signs. The back door stayed shut. No ash trail appeared. No fresh dirt showed up. The bruise faded to yellow, then to nothing. My hands stopped shaking when I reached for the lock. One afternoon, Dona Elba called me over from her gate. She spoke quietly, like she was afraid the wall itself might carry words. "I think I know who did it," she said. Her tone was careful, almost kind. She was offering a truth that would have weight. I felt my stomach drop because a name would turn the unknown into a face I might meet again. I shook my head before she could say anything else. "Please do not," I said. "Do not put it in my head." Dona Elba watched me for a moment and then nodded. She did not look offended. She looked sad, as if she understood why ignorance could feel like shelter. When Tia Veronica returned, she brought groceries and stories from her trip, tired but relieved. I helped her carry bags inside. I told her I had watered the plants and cleaned the patio. I did not tell her about the bundle or the paper with my name. I left her house soon after, making excuses about appointments and obligations. The truth was simpler. I could not stand near that corner without feeling my skin remember the smell of old bone and wet dirt. I never went back to stay there again. I do not know whose teeth were inside that bag. I do not know who wrote my name so carefully, as if they loved it enough to hurt me with it. That is the cruel part. It was personal enough to target me and anonymous enough to survive. If you ever find soil that looks too fresh in a yard that has not been watered, if you ever feel cloth under your fingers where only dirt should be, do not open it. Do not tell yourself it is a cat, or wind, or coincidence. Some things are not buried to disappear. They are buried to be found by the right hands. And if you think you are safe because you do not believe, remember this: belief is not required. Your name is enough.